I've been telling you the last few weeks, I'm looking forward to getting back out there and seeing the finished product. It should be done anytime. A historic home in Declo. I went out and visited there a couple of months ago. It is under renovation, and they're going to maintain a lot of the old history with it. This is through the work of Western Visions, Inc., which is doing business here in the Magic Valley. And when they're done, this is going to become a private lodge. It's going to be right out in the middle of rural Cassia County. If you'd like to know a little bit more, we've been recommending you go to the website, western-visions.com. That's western-visions.com. Because they can do a whole home redesign, which is what's going on right now, or they can just do something as simple as a kitchen redesign or give you new bathrooms, update them, modernize them. And I also wanted to point out, too, while they mainly are focusing on homes, they, in many cases, can also work on a business. A lot of people out there are looking to have an advantage, and you want something that looks more than just like your typical run-of-the-mill shop. The folks at Western Visions Inc. can help you out again. Go to the website. I highly recommend you take a look at the website, western-visions.com, western-visions.com. Got a lot more to talk about this morning with 42 right now, 9:35. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310. KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Why do we have to be worried? I mentioned earlier, and I still think this is an important issue, this notion that, it's mean-spirited to be concerned about who's coming to this country and security threats and the like. Even the liberal comedian Bill Maher has been a strong voice on refugee resettlement, especially strong voice on it, which is a deviation from most of his normal thinking process. On his program on HBO this past Friday night, he was talking with a former Liberal member of the British Parliament. Her name is Mensch. I think the first name is Laurie. But he was speaking with her on his program, and she was trying to say part of the problem, again, you had a Muslim terrorist who attacked and killed people in London the other day, and liberals are out there trying to downplay it, saying, well, this is only going to create more hostility towards our Muslim brothers and sisters. Bill Maher was having nothing of it. Take a listen for a moment.
Trying to turn London people against our Muslim friends and neighbours, although you are not going to do that, Sunshine.
But let's not pretend it has nothing to do with Islam, the religion.
It doesn't.
It has nothing to do with Islam?
It has nothing
That's
to do.
very
It has
interesting.
nothing to do with this, and the way that Timothy McVeigh had nothing to do with Roman Catholicism.
Because every time some bomb goes off, before it goes off, somebody yells Allahu Akbar. I never heard anybody go Merry Christmas.
But to say nothing.
That sort of stopped the liberals, didn't it, when he brought that up? And then as they continue to try to flog this notion that it's just mean-spirited to talk about Muslim bombers, he said, when was the last time someone yelled out, I'm doing it in the name of the flying nun? And that really annoyed all of his liberal guests that evening on the program. We have people, American liberals, their fellow travelers overseas and their fellow travelers in media, will do anything they can to try. They would, if they had had a choice, if, the visuals, they couldn't stay away from them. It's a little bit like a moth flying to the flame. And we didn't know who the attacker was in the very beginning. But here's the thing. When you heard that this attack had happened, I was sitting here when the news first broke, and I have a TV monitor in the studio, and I looked up at it. When you hear about these things, isn't Islam or Muslim one of the first things that goes through your head? Think about it for a moment. Now, it may never, it's not the case. It's always what happens when these attacks occur. But I'm going to bet that one of the first thoughts most people, and even some liberals have, is Muslim when they hear about something like this happening. You're almost conditioned, and generally you're not wrong. In fact, overwhelmingly, you're not wrong if that's what you happen to be thinking when you see something like this. It's the first thought. It's what happened in San Bernardino. It's what happened at Fort Hood. Over the years, I have been conditioned to think that. Does it make it right? No, but, as human beings, if you believe in evolution, and I believe that God is behind evolution, but if you believe in evolution, you understand that we have these responses that are built in for our own safety. So It's Jesse Jackson admitted it. He said if he's walking down a dark street at night and he sees some young black people following him, this is from Jesse Jackson of all people, then he said he is worried. And you this is how it's a survival mechanism. It's a survival instinct. You can't just shut that down or put that away. And then the other part of this is that this story, and it appeared in the New York Times over the weekend, they finally admitted that media is on purpose trying to ignore the story out of Rockville, Maryland, mainstream media, trying to avoid it because, again, they don't want to hurt the feelings of illegal alien criminals. Because they're victims, too. Well, they had to come here and rape that girl in the bathroom now, didn't they? Because you mean whitey Americans have been so rotten to them. A criminal is a criminal. Got it? It doesn't matter where they came from. I don't know where they grew up exactly, what their villages were like, but I'm going to bet that they know that raping a teenage girl is a bad thing to do. They did it because they apparently thought they could get away with it, because they knew they were going to have American liberals saying, oh, but they're victims too. 20 minutes away from 10 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. 42 right now. We've got more on this subject coming up in just a couple of minutes. Talking a little bit about how these folks try to squash viewpoints and ideas and even sometimes the truth when they don't like it. What's going on among the fellow travelers is an effort to restructure how we think. And if they can, it's like when I said 2 weeks ago, I said on the show that we hear the word entitlements bandied about when it comes to welfare, as if everybody's entitled to a welfare check. $20 trillion in debt in this country officially, and yet you somehow are entitled to all of these things that aren't even listed in our Constitution. Here's a CNBC. I think that stands for Clinton NBC. This headline, Dow falls triple digits as optimism on Trump agenda diminishes. That's a headline. Dow Jones Industrial Average is down this morning. Maybe the Dow was already artificially high, and we've had people even before Trump was elected, people like Harry Dent who've been saying, and they've been fairly clear about it, that we have an overinflated market and that it's going to have a rather nasty correction. But now it's, a loss of optimism on Trump agenda. Well, maybe this was going to happen no matter who happened to be the president. Maybe it's the concerns people actually have about the real numbers they're seeing when it comes to the U.S. economy and the world economy. But media doesn't want you to know that. It's 9:44, 39 right now. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We have a caller with us. I'll give out the telephone number, and then we'll get to the caller in just a moment. The number is 736-0300, 736-0300. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air.
Yeah, good morning. George Clooney's wife went to the UN, and she was telling the UN that they had to stop ISIS and Al-Qaeda from doing what they're doing. She's a Muslim woman, but she's protected as any person in this country from retaliation by the Muslims. You look at these so-called moderate Muslims, they believe in the Quran. They're Muslim because they believe in the Quran. They believe in Sharia law. When Al-Qaeda and ISIS starts their uprising here in the United States, once they get enough in here, all these others will back them up.
Well, and thank you for the call. I read it, Crisis Magazine, this morning. They're very adept at using our Western laws against us. So, in fact, you had even a great many constitutionalists. Murfreesboro, Tennessee, a few years ago, the locals tried to block construction of a mosque. I believe it's just behind a Baptist church on one of the streets there. And a lot of people who are constitutionalists, that is the law of the land, came in and actually sided with the Muslims, and they did win the case. Now, there's not much you can do about it if that's what our Constitution says. But these people know that this is going to help them in the infiltration. And if you look around the world, wherever else they've managed to do this and then build their numbers, the numbers reach a tipping point and then the demands start. Look, at the University of Maryland, they're already demanding. They put together a list, I think it was 65 different demands they made of the college. They went forward and said, they immediately said, we demand that you give us special privileges on campus. They didn't care about anybody else's special privileges. And in fact, some of their privileges could trample on the privileges of other people. But they've reached that number. And of course, the useful idiots in the campus administration are like, all right, okay, whatever you like. Christians don't get that. There's an effort right now to unseat a judge in Oregon. In fact, big story about it today in the Washington Times, because his name is Vance Day. If you haven't heard of him yet, little background here from the story from Ralph Hallow, the writer. Vance Day has come to think he stands for all things America's intolerant elites can't stand. He may be right. So in other words, while they give in to the Mohammedans, they go after the Christians still. The Oregon Circuit Court judge served 2 terms as the state's Republican Party chairman. That's strike 1 against him, the writer says. Strike 2 and 3 are that he has an evangelical religious bent that leads him to see homosexuality as sinful. Judge Day says he harbors no ill will toward homosexuals and lesbians and, in fact, has befriended many. But his religious faith prohibits his personally performing a marriage ceremony for same-sex couples. He has no problems with other judges on his bench performing such ceremonies. He instructed court workers to refer same-sex marriage requests to his colleagues and not to him. And he said this, Oregon authorizes but doesn't require its judges to preside over weddings. It's not part of the job. Now, you're going to have the liberals say, well, what if every judge did that and then no gay person, and gay again is another one of those words that has been changed to minimize what we're talking about when it comes to the actions of these people. Well, that's what they want to be called. No, it's a change in the language to subtly shift it away from a term that maybe wasn't so endearing for them. But that's a debate for another day and a story for another day. We'll get back to that fact in just a moment. All right, if all the judges refused, well, who could still perform marriages? Well, churches. Well, what if the churches refuse to marry these people? There are a lot of folks out there who are authorized to perform marriages. You will find someone who will do it. This is a big country. A friend of mine grew up in a Presbyterian home. He was one of my best friends when I was in college back in the dark ages. And he met a woman from Mexico way back in the late 1980s. And she had been raised Catholic, but she no longer wanted to practice her religious faith. And yet so they didn't want to get married in a Catholic church. They didn't want to get married in a Presbyterian church. They just wanted to get married. But they didn't want to go before a justice of the peace. So government can, and it has people available who can perform weddings. They, even though they are not Muslims and they don't necessarily approve of the Muslim religious faith, there was an imam who lived down the street. So they went down to him and said, look, are you licensed to do marriages? And he said, yes. And they said, well, we want to get married, but we're not going to be converting and we're not Muslims. Will you still do the wedding? And he said, yes, because they paid him a fee. Somebody has to make a living from this. So they went down to the local riverside in their hometown in Winchester, Virginia. They went down to the local riverside or near a stream, and they got married because it was a nice, pretty setting. And he officiated at the wedding, but he did it as a secular wedding for them. There are choices for people out there. You don't have to force everybody else to conform. But liberals, they'd like to make Christians conform, but they were afraid of the Muslims. There's those 2 stories, the one about the university and the demands and then what's going on in Oregon. Those 2 stories tell us and inform us that this is clearly an anti-Christian effort that is taking place. And so we were talking a little bit about how language gets changed they try to silence language they don't like because the language itself can betray them. Over at the Wall Street Journal today, a writer by the name of Crispin Sartwell, and this is called The Postmodern Intellectual Roots of Today's Campus Mobs. He says, this theory, which we might call linguistic constructivism, holds that we don't merely describe or represent the world in language. Language creates the world and ourselves. A favorite slogan of our moment, quote, words have power, unquote, reflects that view, which is why they try to silence views they don't like or speech they don't like. It's because if they can control the speech, then they can control the dialogue. Before the end of the 90s, he writes, Nike was using the slogan, quote, we are the stories we tell, unquote. In politics and advertising, strategic communications turn to questions about how to remake people's consciousness, for example, by reframing as suggested by Goodman, that's one of the writers he's quoting here, Therapists help their patients make their stories more positive. In other words, you change the language in hopes of changing reality. He said it's been going on for decades. He said after the 60s civil rights movement, white Americans, by and large, learned not to use racist language. In other words, they stopped using the N word or calling people colored or spooks or names like that. But that helped convince people that they were then less racist, even if they weren't necessarily less racist. So the left saw all of this going on, and the left adopted this tactic. We're just going to change the language and therefore exert more control and get what we want. 9:52, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Telephone number to reach our program, 736-0300, 736-0300. A quick note, Dr. Jonathan Tripp, or one of his associates, will be in studio with us coming up on Wednesday morning between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. We do this every week with Tripp Family Medicine. It's called Better Health. They have a great slogan, life's too short not to feel good. The office is located on Fillmore Street, directly across from the main post office in Twin Falls. The doctor's office still looking for new patients, and often at Tripp Family Medicine, they can see you on the very same day. If you call in the morning and you've got a medical issue, they generally can see you on the same day, if not generally by the following morning. 9:53 now, 41 we'll call it. Weather looks like we may have some overnight snowflakes at times during the week, but it won't be anything that's going to shouldn't cause too many inconveniences. And just to note, the weather is a service of Mountain Home Auto Ranch in Mountain Home. So you take a word like entitlements. They tell you that you deserve a government check, that you're entitled to it. Even conservatives now refer to this as entitlements because, well, whatever we used to call it, we've apparently forgotten it because liberals and the fellow travelers adopted the word entitlements, and then they amplified it in media. They amplified it by calling it entitlements. So I would meet politicians by the late 1980s and early 1990s, and I'd be interviewing them, and even the conservative ones would say, well, we need entitlement reform, whatever that means. Does that mean we're going to take it away from everybody? Well, no, we just need reform. What do you mean by reform? Well, reform. Does that mean cuts? Well, it could be. Well, hold on a minute here. And then they started saying, well, I'm not homosexual, I'm gay. Well, gay means happy. You see, I'm happy. Homosexual is a mean word. In fact, Maureen Dowd at the New York Times had a column a few years ago where she said we should stop using it altogether. We should ban the word because it has a nasty connotation. It's mean-spirited, if you will, so we can't use that word anymore. So now it has to be gay or same-sex relationship. You're not making a judgment on anybody if you still use the scientific term homosexual, but you're frowned upon if you do because they want you to believe, oh, it's gay. So they've changed that. So you've got entitlements. You've got gay. It shows you the depths we've reached. Back in Kampuchea, which had been Cambodia, but when Pol Pot and his communists took it over, they were known as the Khmer Rouge, they changed the name from Cambodia to Kampuchea, and then he immediately declared it was year zero, and that all the other years and everything that happened before didn't happen. Do you ever see the Woody Allen movie Bananas? He goes down to South America and ends up getting caught in a South American revolution with a Castro-like figure. The Castro-like figure ends up leading his revolution to victory, and they chase out the dictator, and the new dictator, the communist, walks out, supposedly to liberate everybody, and he stands out on the balcony, and he's addressing the crowd, and he says, beginning today, everybody under the age of 16 is now 16. And we also are going to have everybody wear their underwear on the outside because you have to check it. You have to change it now 3 times a day, and that way we can figure out if you're doing it. And he starts making all of these ridiculous laws. And the great line, his assistant says, power has driven him mad. But there you go. They start changing what is actually the natural course of things in order to try and tell you that's not natural any longer. This is the new natural. This is the new normal. And this is the direction we continue to go in this country, is they try to tell you what you can say and what you can't say. And after a while, it does get to that. I've slipped and used the word entitlements, even though nowhere in the Constitution does it say that you're entitled to a check from somebody else. 9:57. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. It's 42. Here's a good example. This comes from Peter Heck writing at he's writing at the Resurgent, but he's writing about something called the Southern Poverty Law Center, which claims that certain language is hateful and claims that certain groups it doesn't like happen to be hateful because we have refused to adopt the new language. But he goes on to say this: the SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center, is actually an elaborately wealthy interest group despite its status as tax exempt. Their founding leader, Morris S. Dees, lives an extravagant lifestyle with his now fifth wife. Despite its name, the Southern Poverty Law Center does a paltry amount of actual litigation on behalf of the poor and underprivileged. So they call themselves the Southern Poverty Law Center, and you're thinking, oh, they must go out and do work for impoverished people across the South. Not at all. Instead, they claim that people who believe the Bible and that you're a hater if you believe certain things it says. But once again, they've changed the language or adopted language, and they've marketed it in a way to convince you that if you don't go along with it, that you're somehow against poverty in the South, you're against the gay, that is the happy, and you're against giving people things they're entitled to, even if it's yours to begin with. God willing, if the creek don't rise, they'll allow me to come back and do this all over again tomorrow morning here on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. Bill Colley with you this morning. Rush Limbaugh's program scheduled next after the news from Fox, just after the 10 o'clock news. Steve Millington scheduled to join us tomorrow in studio between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. He's the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party.